She had 5 coins left in her trembling hand, and in that moment between hunger and hope, a stranger's voice behind her whispered a name she thought was buried forever. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed overhead like restless ghosts, casting harsh shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in a forgotten corner of Detroit, where the streets smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and broken promises. The girl standing at the counter couldn't have been more than 19 years old, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes. Her name was Maya Chen, though no one in this neighborhood knew her story, the chapters written in scars hidden beneath long sleeves and longer silences. Her baby daughter, 3 months old, was strapped to her chest in a worn fabric carrier that had seen better days. The infant's name was Hope, because Maya believed that even in the darkest valleys, you must name what you're fighting for. Hope was sleeping now, her tiny chest rising and falling with the rhythm of innocence, unaware that her mother was counting coins with the desperation of someone performing surgery with a butter knife. 5 coins, 2 quarters, 3 dimes, 1 nickel, 85 cents. The formula in Maya's shaking hand cost $6.49. Stay with me. What comes next will either break your heart or remind you why we must never look away from the struggles hiding in plain sight. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Denise, watched Maya count and recount those coins. There's a particular kind of pain that mothers recognize in other mothers, a silent language spoken through clenched jaws and eyes that refuse to cry in public. Denise had seen this scene before, too many times, in too many variations. Young mothers, old mothers, mothers of all colors and creeds, standing at her counter with empty wallets and full hearts, trying to feed babies with change scraped from couch cushions and car floors. "Honey," Denise began, her voice soft as Sunday morning rain, "maybe you could—" "I have it," Maya interrupted, her voice cracking like thin ice under too much weight. "I have it somewhere. Just give me a second." But she didn't have it. Maya Chen hadn't had much of anything since the fire that took her apartment, her belongings, and her dignity 6 weeks ago. She'd been couch surfing, sleeping in her car when couches weren't available, showering at the community center when she could time it right between the morning crowd and the afternoon rush. Her phone had been disconnected. Her bank account had been closed due to inactivity and insufficient funds. The bridges she'd burned in her past stood like charred monuments to choices made in desperation and youth, and there was no going back across them now. Behind her in line stood a man who seemed to belong to a different universe entirely. His suit probably cost more than Maya had earned in the past year, back when she had a job, back when she had a life that made sense on paper. He was tall, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair combed back with the precision of someone who understood that details matter. His watch caught the fluorescent light and threw it back like a challenge. Everything about him whispered wealth, power, control. Everything except his eyes. Those eyes were watching Maya with an intensity that went beyond impatience, beyond annoyance at being held up in line. Those eyes were searching, calculating, remembering. His name was Marcus Reeves, though the world knew him by different titles. Billionaire, philanthropist, real estate mogul, media darling. The man who'd built an empire from Detroit's ruins and refused to abandon the city that raised him. But tonight, standing in this convenience store in a neighborhood his security team had advised against visiting, Marcus Reeves wasn't thinking about his empire. He was thinking about a promise he'd made 20 years ago to a woman whose face he'd never forgotten, and a child he'd never met. Maya's hands were shaking harder now. Hope stirred against her chest, making those small sounds that every mother knows as the prelude to hunger's cry. In 30 minutes, maybe less, that baby would be screaming, and Maya would have nothing to give her. The formula she'd bought yesterday was gone. The shelter where she'd been staying had run out of donations. The food bank didn't open until Thursday. This was Tuesday night, and Tuesday night felt like the edge of the world. "I can put it back," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible, each word a small death. I'll figure something out." But before Denise could respond, before Maya could return the formula to the shelf where it would sit like a monument to maternal defeat, Marcus Reeves stepped forward. His hand reached past Maya, placing a black credit card on the counter with the casual grace of someone for whom money had long ceased to be a concern. The card made a soft click against the plastic counter, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "I'll cover it," he said simply. Maya turned, and for the first time, their eyes met. There are moments in life when time doesn't just slow down, but seems to stop entirely, when the universe holds its breath and waits to see what happens next. This was one of those moments. Maya saw wealth, yes, but also something else. Sadness, perhaps, or recognition, or the ghost of guilt that haunts men who've lived long enough to accumulate regrets alongside their fortunes. "I can't," Maya began, pride warring with desperation in her throat. "I don't accept—" "You can, and you will," Marcus interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed but wise enough to know when power must bow to compassion. "Not for you, for her." He nodded toward Hope, still sleeping against Maya's chest, unaware that her next meal hung in the balance of adult pride and stranger kindness. Denise, sensing the weight of the moment, quietly scanned the formula and processed the card. The machine beeped its approval. Transaction complete. $6.49 plus tax. An amount that meant nothing to Marcus Reeves and everything to Maya Chen. But as Marcus handed the bag to Maya, his fingers brushed hers, and he felt something that made his breath catch. A small silver bracelet on her wrist, tarnished and worn, but unmistakable. It bore a charm in the shape of a lotus flower, and on its back, if you looked closely, were initials carved with the careful precision of young love. LC plus MR Lily Chen and Marcus Reeves. 20 years ago. A lifetime ago. An eternity ago. His hand froze. His eyes traveled from the bracelet to Maya's face, really seeing her now, looking past the exhaustion and desperation to the bone structure, the curve of her cheek, the exact shade of her eyes. Dark brown, almost black, with flecks of gold when the light hit them right. Lily's eyes. He'd know those eyes anywhere, had dreamed about them for 2 decades, had searched for them in every woman he'd dated, every relationship he'd sabotaged, because no one measured up to a memory. "Where did you get that bracelet?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly tight, each word measured and careful, as though he were diffusing a bomb rather than asking a simple question. Maya looked down at her wrist, at the bracelet she never removed, even when she'd sold everything else. Especially when she'd sold everything else. It was the last physical connection to a mother she barely remembered, a woman who died when Maya was 2 years old, leaving behind only scattered photographs, second-hand stories, and this tarnished piece of silver. "It was my mother's," Maya said quietly, clutching the formula bag against her chest like armor. "Why?" And in that moment, in that fluorescent-lit convenience store that smelled of stale coffee and desperate dreams, Marcus Reeves understood that the universe doesn't forget debts, even the ones we've tried to bury, especially those. The silence that followed Maya's answer stretched between them like a bridge made of spider silk, delicate and trembling, capable of holding weight or breaking under the slightest breath. Marcus Reeves had built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar deals, stared down corporate sharks and political wolves without flinching. But standing in this convenience store, looking at a 19-year-old girl with his lost love's eyes and a baby strapped to her chest, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Terror. Pure, unfiltered, existential terror. "Your mother," he repeated, his voice hoarse, as if the words were climbing out of a well that had been sealed shut for decades. What was her name? Maya's eyes narrowed with the instinctive suspicion of someone who'd learned that when strangers ask questions, they usually want something you can't afford to give. Her grip tightened on the formula bag, and she took a half-step back, putting distance between herself and this man in his expensive suit, with his probing questions and his unsettling intensity. "Why does it matter?" she asked, her defensive walls rising like castle fortifications. Hope stirred against her chest, sensing her mother's tension through that mysterious connection between parent and child that needs no words. Marcus held up his hands in a gesture of peace, of surrender, though what he was surrendering to he couldn't quite name. Fate, perhaps, or cosmic justice, or the simple mathematical certainty that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually claw their way back to the surface. "I knew a woman once," he began, choosing each word with the care of a man walking through a minefield in the dark. "A long time ago, before I was this." He gestured vaguely at himself, at his suit, at the expensive watch and the black credit card and everything they represented. "She wore a bracelet exactly like that one. I gave it to her when we were young and stupid and convinced that love could conquer poverty, addiction, and all the demons that hunt people in cities like Detroit." Maya's face remained guarded, but something flickered in those gold-flecked eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint hope that every orphaned child carries, the desperate wish that somewhere, somehow, there's a story that makes sense of the abandonment, the loss, the endless question of why. "Her name was Lily Chen," Marcus continued, and he watched Maya's expression crack just slightly, like the first fissure in a dam that's been holding back an ocean. "She was beautiful and brilliant and broken in ways I was too young and too arrogant to understand. We were going to change the world together, or at least change Detroit, which felt like the same thing when you're 21 and high on dreams and cheap wine." Denise, the cashier, had abandoned all pretense of working. She stood frozen behind her counter, witnessing something that transcended the usual convenience store drama of denied credit cards and lottery ticket arguments. This was different. This was the kind of story that people tell their families over dinner, the kind that gets embellished and retold until it becomes legend. "Lily Chen was my mother," Maya whispered, and the words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, sending ripples in every direction. "She died when I was 2. Overdose. I grew up in foster care, bounced around until I aged out of the system at 18. Nobody ever talked about my father. The social workers said he wasn't in the picture, that my mother never listed him on any paperwork." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him, felt the careful architecture of his life, built with such precision over 20 years, begin to crumble like sandcastles at high tide. He'd known Lily was pregnant when he left for Stanford on that full scholarship, the golden ticket out of poverty that only comes once in a lifetime. He'd known, and he'd made a choice. The choice that haunted him every day since, the choice that turned him into a man who built empires but couldn't build a family, who donated millions to charity, but couldn't donate the one thing that mattered: presence, accountability, love. "I was supposed to come back," he said, his voice breaking on words that felt like confessions pulled from his chest with rusty pliers. "After my first semester, I sent money, every month, everything I could spare from my part-time jobs. I wrote letters, but they came back unopened. And then one day the money I sent was returned with a note that said she'd moved, no forwarding address. I searched, God knows I searched, but Detroit is a big city when someone doesn't want to be found. And I told myself she was better off without me, that I would come back when I'd made something of myself, when I could offer her and our child a life worth living." "But you didn't come back," Maya said flatly, and the accusation in her voice was sharper than any blade, more devastating than any corporate takeover or hostile board meeting. "You built your empire. You became Marcus Reeves, the billionaire who saved Detroit. And my mother died alone in a motel room with a needle in her arm, while I screamed in a crib that child services found 3 days later." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain the complexity of choices made at 21, to argue that he'd been a kid himself, terrified and overwhelmed and doing the best he could. But he'd learned in his 5 decades of life that some truths don't need defending. They just need to be witnessed, acknowledged, carried. "I didn't know she died," he said quietly. "I didn't know about you, but that's not an excuse. I should have tried harder. I should have—" He stopped, because should-haves are the luxury of people who still have time to fix their mistakes. Standing in front of Maya, looking at the baby girl who was his granddaughter, though neither of them had named that reality yet, Marcus understood that some mistakes can never be fixed. They can only be lived with, learned from, perhaps partially redeemed. Hope chose that moment to wake up, her small cry cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a knife through silk. Maya automatically began the swaying motion that all mothers learn, the universal dance of comfort, but her eyes never left Marcus's face. She was studying him now, looking for something, resemblance perhaps, or sincerity, or the answer to a question she'd been asking her entire life. Why wasn't I enough? Why didn't anyone stay? If Lily was your mother, Marcus said slowly, each word weighted with the gravity of shifting universes, then I'm your father, which makes that beautiful baby girl my granddaughter. Sharing these heart-wrenching stories isn't easy, but if you feel the weight of these hidden bonds, of connections lost and found in the most unexpected places, subscribe and join us. Your like can spread empathy across the digital void, and your comment can share a story that touches another soul navigating their own darkness. We're building something here, a community that refuses to look away from the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of what it means to be human. Maya laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that has nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the absurdity of life. The cosmic joke that brings billionaire fathers and homeless daughters together in convenience stores at midnight, when the world has shrunk down to 5 coins and a can of formula. The laugh died quickly, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Anger, perhaps, or the exhaustion of someone who's been fighting alone for so long that the offer of help feels like an insult rather than a gift. "You're my father," she repeated, tasting the words like poison or medicine, unable to tell the difference. "The great Marcus Reeves, and you're just finding out now, 20 years later, because I happen to need formula in a store you happen to visit. What are the odds? What are the absolutely impossible, ridiculous, cosmic comedy odds?" "I don't believe in coincidence," Marcus said. And for the first time since this conversation began, his voice carried the steel that had made him a legend in boardrooms from New York to Shanghai. "I believe in purpose. I believe the universe has a way of correcting imbalances, of forcing us to face the debts we thought we'd outrun. I've been coming to this store every Tuesday night for 3 years, ever since I bought the building and decided to keep it operating, even though it loses money every month. I come here because this was Lily's neighborhood, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept hoping I might find a trace of her, might understand what happened, might make peace with the choices I made." He paused, looking at Hope, really seeing her for the first time. Dark hair, olive skin, eyes that hadn't yet settled on their permanent color, but seemed to be deciding between brown and hazel. She had his chin, that stubborn set that photographers always tried to soften in his corporate portraits. She had Lily's delicate hands, with fingers that seemed too long for such a small body. She was a miracle and a judgment, a promise and an accusation. "I can't change the past," Marcus said, his voice dropping to something raw and unpolished, the voice of the 21-year-old kid he used to be before wealth and success had smoothed away all his rough edges. "I can't bring Lily back. I can't give you the childhood you deserved, the father who should have been there for skinned knees and bad dreams and first days of school. But I can be here now, if you'll let me." The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person, and Maya stared at it, with the wariness of someone who'd learned that lifelines often come with hooks hidden inside them, ready to snag and tear and drag you down deeper than you started. Trust was a luxury she'd never been able to afford, not in foster homes where kindness came with conditions, not in relationships where love evaporated the moment things got difficult, not in a world that had taught her over and over that the only person she could rely on was herself, and lately even that certainty had been crumbling. "Be here now," she repeated, her voice edged with exhaustion and something sharper, something that cut both ways. "With your money and your connections and your ability to fix everything with a credit card. Is that what you think I need? Is that what you think makes up for 20 years of absence?" Hope was fussing more insistently now, her small cries escalating toward the full-throated wail that would come if she wasn't fed soon. Maya shifted her weight, bouncing gently, but her eyes never left Marcus's face. She was waiting for something, testing him, the way people who've been disappointed too many times test everyone who comes close. Marcus felt the weight of her gaze, felt the judgment in it, and knew he deserved every ounce of her suspicion. In his world, problems were solved with capital. Financial capital, social capital, political capital. You identified an inefficiency, allocated resources, monitored metrics, achieved objectives. But standing here watching his daughter, the word still felt foreign and sharp in his mind, struggle with a hungry baby, and the accumulated trauma of a childhood he should have prevented. He understood that some problems can't be solved with money. Some wounds need different medicine. "No," he said finally, and the admission cost him something, peeled away another layer of the armor he'd spent decades constructing. "That's not what I think. That's just the only language I've learned to speak fluently. Money deals transactions. Everything in my life has been transactional for so long that I've forgotten how to just be. How to show up without an agenda, without trying to control outcomes or negotiate terms." He ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture of helplessness that looked strange on a man who'd graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, who'd been called a titan and a visionary and a force of nature. Right now, he just looked old and lost and afraid. "But I want to learn," he continued, and something in his voice had changed, had softened into something more honest than anything he'd said in years of carefully scripted interviews and strategic public appearances. "I want to know my granddaughter. I want to know you. I want to understand what Lily's life was like after I left, even if it destroys me to hear it. I want to carry the weight I should have been carrying all along." Denise, still watching from behind her counter, wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. She'd worked in this store for 15 years, had seen every variation of human drama that a convenience store could offer, but this was different. This was the kind of moment that reminded her why she kept showing up to this job that paid too little and asked too much. Because sometimes in the fluorescent-lit aisles between motor oil and candy bars, you witnessed the universe rearranging itself, watched broken things try to become whole again. Maya looked down at Hope, whose face was scrunched up in that particular way that signaled an imminent meltdown. She needed to feed her daughter. She needed to think. She needed to process the fact that the man standing in front of her, this stranger in an expensive suit, was supposedly her father, a title that felt both weightless and crushing at the same time. "I need to feed her," Maya said quietly, gesturing toward Hope. "I need to go somewhere and feed my baby and figure out if I'm hallucinating this entire conversation because I haven't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in 3 months, and maybe exhaustion has finally broken my brain." "There's a cafe 2 blocks from here," Marcus said quickly. Too quickly, the desperation showing through his carefully maintained composure. 24 hours. Quiet. We could talk there, or not talk. You could feed Hope, and I could just sit nearby. Present but not invasive. There but not demanding. Whatever you need. Maya studied him for a long moment, doing the calculations that people in precarious situations always do. Risk versus reward. Danger versus opportunity. The possibility that this was real versus the probability that it was another disappointment waiting to happen. But Hope was crying in earnest now, and Maya's options had narrowed to a point so sharp it drew blood. "Fine," she said finally. 2 hours. You buy me coffee, I feed my daughter, and you explain why I should believe anything you're saying. Then I leave, and you go back to your billionaire life and we both pretend this never happened." "Deal," Marcus said, even though they both knew she was lying. Some encounters can't be pretended away. Some moments reshape everything that comes after them, like earthquakes that redraw the landscape, leaving nothing in the same place it was before. They walked to the cafe in silence, an odd trio moving through Detroit's midnight streets. The billionaire, the homeless mother, and the baby who connected them in ways they were only beginning to understand. The city was quieter at this hour, the usual traffic noise reduced to an occasional car passing. The sirens that were Detroit's constant soundtrack temporarily hushed. Streetlights created pools of amber illumination that they moved through like stages in a journey, light to dark to light again. The cafe, when they reached it, was exactly as Marcus had described. Quiet, warm, almost empty. A barista with purple hair and tired eyes looked up from her phone as they entered, took in the unlikely group and wisely asked no questions. Marcus ordered coffee for himself and Maya hot chocolate because Maya mentioned craving something sweet, and a pastry basket, because he didn't know what else to do with his hands or his need to provide, to fix, to make things better through the simple act of giving. They sat at a corner booth, vinyl seats cracked with age and use, table slightly sticky despite the barista's best efforts. Maya prepared Hope's bottle with the formula Marcus had bought. the formula that had started this entire impossible conversation and began feeding her daughter with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to do everything one-handed while holding a baby. Hope latched onto the bottle eagerly, her small hands grasping at it, her eyes already starting to drift closed in that milk-drunk contentment that babies achieve. "She's beautiful," Marcus said, and his voice cracked on the words, emotions spilling through the cracks in his composure. "She looks like Lily, around the eyes." "Everyone says she looks like me," Maya said, not quite defensive but close. "I don't see my mother in her. I barely remember my mother. I have maybe 5 clear memories, and half of them might be dreams I've convinced myself are real. That's what happens when you lose someone that young. They become mythology instead of memory." Marcus wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, using the heat to ground himself, to focus on something physical and immediate, instead of the crushing weight of regret that threatened to drown him. He'd spent 20 years becoming someone important, someone powerful, someone who mattered on a scale that most people couldn't comprehend. But what did it matter, really? What good was an empire built on the foundation of abandoned family, of choices made in fear and selfishness disguised as ambition? "Tell me about her," he said quietly. "Tell me about Lily, the woman she became after I left, the mother she was, even if it was only for 2 years. I need to know. I need to understand what I walked away from." If you're still with us, if this story of fractured families and unexpected reunions is touching something in your soul, we invite you to be part of this community. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like if this resonates, and share in the comments below. Have you ever discovered a family connection you never knew existed? Have you ever had to decide whether to forgive someone who doesn't deserve it but needs it desperately? Your stories matter. Your voice matters. Together, we're weaving a tapestry of human experience that reminds us we're never as alone as we think we are. Maya looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected to see. Genuine pain, genuine hunger for information about a woman he'd loved and lost and failed. It didn't excuse what he'd done, didn't erase the 20 years of absence or the childhood she'd survived instead of lived, but it was something. A starting point, maybe. A crack in the armor wide enough to let in a sliver of light. "I'll tell you what I know," she said slowly, still feeding hope, still protecting her even as she prepared to open old wounds. "But you need to understand something first. You don't get to be absolved. You don't get to hear Lily's story and feel better about your choices. You get to carry it. You get to live with it. That's the price of showing up 20 years late." "I understand," Marcus said, and he did. He understood that forgiveness, if it ever came, would be earned in inches over years, not granted in a single midnight conversation over coffee and baby formula. He understood that being a father, being a grandfather, meant showing up even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, carrying the weight of past failures while trying to build something better for the future. "Then listen," Maya said, and she began to tell him about Lily Chen, the brilliant girl who became a struggling woman, the mother who loved fiercely but couldn't quite love herself enough to stay alive. And Marcus listened every word, a small death, every revelation, a reminder of what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away, what he could never get back but might, if he was very lucky and very persistent and very present, begin to redeem. Maya's voice was steady as she spoke, steady in the way that trauma survivors learn to be when recounting the unrecountable, when turning pain into narrative so it can be examined, understood, perhaps even survived. Hope had finished her bottle and fallen asleep against her mother's chest, her small body rising and falling with the rhythm of complete trust, the kind of trust that Maya was trying to decide whether to extend to the man sitting across from her. "My mother was studying biochemistry when she got pregnant," Maya began, her fingers unconsciously stroking Hope's dark hair. "She was 20 years old, top of her class, full scholarship to Wayne State. The social workers told me that much, showed me her records when I turned 18 and demanded to know my history. She had a future, Marcus. She had plans. And then she had me, and all those plans evaporated like water on hot concrete." Marcus flinched at the implication, at the weight of cause and effect, at the undeniable mathematics of how one person's choice to leave created a cascade of consequences for everyone left behind. He wanted to interrupt, to explain, to defend, but he'd promised to listen. And listening was the least he owed to the ghost of the woman he'd loved and the daughter who survived her. She tried, Maya continued, and something in her voice softened, became almost tender. The foster parents who eventually told me about her said she really tried. She worked 3 jobs while taking night classes trying to finish her degree. She kept us in a small apartment near the university, and apparently I was a happy baby. There are photos. The social workers saved a box of her things for me. Pictures of her holding me, both of us smiling, both of us looking like maybe we'd make it. She paused, took a sip of her hot chocolate, letting the sweetness coat her throat, buying time to navigate the harder parts of the story. Marcus waited, his coffee untouched and cooling, his entire focus on Maya's words, on the history he'd missed, on the alternative universe where he'd stayed and everything might have been different. But biochemistry is expensive, Maya said, her voice hardening again. Textbooks, lab fees, supplies, and childcare in Detroit isn't cheap, especially not the kind that operates at 3 a.m. when you're working the overnight shift at a diner. She started missing classes, started failing exams, started losing jobs because she couldn't find reliable childcare and had to bring me to work. The university put her on academic probation, then suspended her scholarship. And without that scholarship, without the promise of a degree, without the future she'd been building, she started to crumble. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing it all too clearly. He'd sent money, yes, but money without presence is just paper. It can't hold you when you're breaking. It can't tell you that you matter, that you're not alone, that the struggle is temporary and the dawn is coming. Money is practical, but it isn't love. And Lily had needed love more than she needed his guilt payments mailed from California with no return address because he was too cowarded to face what he'd done. The drug started as a way to stay awake, Maya said, her clinical tone a shield against the emotions underneath. Pills to study, pills to work double shifts, pills to be the mother she thought I deserved while being the student she thought she still was. Uppers to function, downers to sleep, a whole pharmaceutical cocktail to manage an unmanageable life. And when pills got too expensive or too hard to find, she moved to cheaper alternatives. Meth, heroin, whatever would take away the constant exhaustion, the constant fear, the constant knowledge that she was failing at everything that mattered. Hope stirred in her sleep, making small sounds, and Maya automatically adjusted her position, that maternal instinct that operates below conscious thought. The knowledge that your child's comfort matters more than your own. Marcus watched the gesture and saw Lily in it, remembered how she used to care for stray cats in their neighborhood. With that same gentle attentiveness, how she'd been the person who noticed suffering and couldn't walk past it without trying to help. She loved me, Maya said firmly, and this was clearly important to her, the one truth she'd built her identity around. Even when she was high, even when she was barely functional, even when child services was knocking on the door and she was hiding me in closets so they wouldn't take me away, she loved me. The foster parents said that when they found me, 3 days after she died, I was clean, fed, changed. She'd made sure I was taken care of before she took that final hit. She'd used the last of her money to buy baby food and diapers instead of drugs. She chose me at the end. She just couldn't choose herself. The tears came then, silent and steady, running down Maya's face while her voice remained controlled. That heartbreaking contradiction of emotion and composure that people develop when they've had to cry quietly so no one hears, when vulnerability has always been a luxury they couldn't afford. Marcus reached across the table instinctively, then stopped, his hand hovering in the space between them. Unsure if he had the right to offer comfort, unsure if his touch would be welcomed or rejected. Maya saw the gesture, saw the uncertainty in it, and after a moment that stretched like eternity, she placed her free hand in his. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement, connection, the beginning of something that might someday resemble a relationship. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and the words were inadequate, laughably insufficient for the magnitude of what they needed to carry. "I'm so profoundly sorry, Maya, for leaving, for not trying harder to find her, for building a life of success on the foundation of her failure, for every choice I made that led to this moment, to you sitting here with my granddaughter, homeless and desperate, while I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Sorry doesn't feed hope, Maya said, but without venom, just stating a fact. Sorry doesn't give me back my mother or my childhood, or the father I needed, when foster families were passing me around like an unwanted gift. Sorry is cheap, Marcus. Anyone can be sorry. You're right, he agreed, because what else could he say? So tell me what isn't cheap. Tell me what would actually matter. Not what you think I want to hear, not what sounds noble or forgiving or mature. Tell me the truth. What do you need? Maya was quiet for a long time, staring at Hope's sleeping face, at this tiny human who depended on her completely, who deserved better than overnight stays in cars and meals skipped so there'd be money for formula. She'd been surviving for so long, operating in crisis mode, that the question of what she actually needed, not just to survive but to thrive, to build a life instead of just enduring one, felt almost impossible to answer. I need stability, she said finally. I need a place to live where I'm not terrified of eviction notices. I need childcare so I can finish my GED and maybe take some college classes. I need health insurance for Hope's vaccines and checkups. I need a job that pays enough that I'm not counting coins at midnight. I need... She paused, struggling with the vulnerability of it. I need to know that if something happens to me, someone will be there for my daughter, that she won't end up in the system like I did, bouncing between strangers who are paid to care but don't actually love her. Done, Marcus said immediately. All of it. I'll set up a trust, get you an apartment, arrange for childcare and healthcare and... No, Maya interrupted, and her voice was sharp again, cutting through his rescue fantasy. You didn't get to just throw money at this and walk away feeling like you fixed everything. If you're going to be in our lives, you're actually going to be in our lives. Not as a checkbook, not as a benefactor, as a grandfather, as a father. That means showing up even when it's inconvenient. That means being present for the boring parts, not just the dramatic reconciliations. That means learning who I am, not who you wish I was or who you think Lily would have wanted me to be. Marcus sat back, the conditions landing like a challenge, and realized that Maya was offering him something far more difficult than financial support. She was offering him the chance to actually be family, with all the messy, complicated, uncomfortable reality that entailed. No contracts, no clear exit strategies, no metrics for success. Just the daily work of showing up, listening, failing, trying again, building trust incrementally through 1,000 small moments rather than one grand gesture. I can do that, he said, and he meant it, even though he had no idea if it was true. Even though every instinct trained by decades in business told him that commitments without clear parameters were dangerous, that emotional investments without guaranteed returns were foolish. I want to do that. I want to know you. I want to watch Hope grow up. I want to be the grandfather who shows up for recitals and soccer games and college graduations. And I want to be the father I should have been 20 years ago, even if I'm arriving absurdly late to that role. Maya studied his face, looking for sincerity or manipulation, for genuine commitment or performative redemption. What she saw was imperfect but real. A man who'd spent his life running from the consequences of his choices, finally standing still long enough to face them. Not a hero, not a villain, just a human being, flawed and trying, which was perhaps the most anyone could offer. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we'll try, but Marcus... She waited until he met her eyes. If you leave again, if you decide this is too hard or too complicated or too demanding of your precious time, do not bother coming back. Hope deserves better than a grandfather who disappears when things get difficult. I deserve better than a father who chose ambition over accountability. So if you're in, be all the way in. Otherwise, just write us a check and let us disappear back into whatever Detroit neighborhood you're unlikely to visit. I'm in, Marcus said, and felt the words rearrange something fundamental inside him, felt the careful walls he'd built around his heart develop cracks wide enough for light to enter. All the way in, for as long as you'll have me. Outside the cafe window, Detroit was beginning its slow transformation from night to dawn. The sky was lightening by imperceptible degrees, darkness giving way to that particular shade of blue that exists only in the space between midnight and morning. It was a new day, literally and metaphorically, and neither Marcus nor Maya knew exactly what it would bring. But they knew they'd face it together, connected by blood and circumstance, and the ghost of a woman who'd loved them both and deserved better from both of them. Hope woke as the first rays of sunlight touched the cafe window, her eyes opening slowly, focusing on her mother's face with that absolute trust that babies give, that certainty that the universe revolves around the person holding them. Maya smiled at her daughter, then looked at Marcus, and in that moment, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet. Not trust, not completely. But possibility. The recognition that endings can also be beginnings, that the most broken things sometimes heal into the strongest shapes, that family isn't just who you're born to, but who chooses, every day, to stay. This was the journey of souls intersecting at midnight, of 5 coins that became a catalyst for transformation, of a billionaire who learned that wealth means nothing without connection, and a homeless mother who discovered that asking for help isn't weakness, but courage. If you felt the ache of absent fathers, the weight of impossible choices, or the shocking grace of second chances, we invite you into this community of imperfect humans trying to do better. Subscribe to join us on this journey. Like if these stories of redemption and reunion remind you that it's never too late to choose differently. Comment and share your own stories of unexpected family, of bridges rebuilt, of love that survives even abandonment. Together we bear witness to the truth that we're all just trying to find our way home, whatever home means, and sometimes home finds us in the most unlikely places, like a convenience store at midnight with 5 coins and a prayer and a universe that refuses to let us forget the debts we owe to each other.